أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. This is Sadek Kamani and I welcome you all to my show Youth Responsibilities. So today we will be discussing upon one of the most important topic for young individuals is that how do we spend our time? Is it necessary that we spend our time on social media? Is there any other alternative which can yield us some good results? Or what are the options for us as young individuals? And tonight, for this topic, we have an important guest, and I have been honored and privileged to welcome Sayyid Muhammad Mahdi Al Mudarrisi, who's Alhamdulillah studied in Damascus, Syria, then graduated from Islamic Seminary of Qom, and then obviously his uncle happens to be Ayatollah Al Uzma, Sayyid Muhammad Taqi Al Mudarrisi from Iraq. His uncle happens to be Ayatollah Al Uzma, Sayyid Murtaza Al Qazwini. His cousins happens to be Sayyid Hussein Al Qazwini, Sayyid Jawad Al Qazwini. So Alhamdulillah, a good family of religious jurisprudence, right? So indeed, I welcome you, Sayyid Muhammad Mahdi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother Sadek.
First and foremost, thank you so much for giving us your time. And thank you so much for coming here, Sayyid.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor being here.
So Sayyid, as we were discussing that, my first question of this evening will be, how important time is for any other youth and compared to people who are above 40 or perhaps people who are above 50s?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammadin wa ajjil farajahum. I think there's no question that the time and vitality of the youth is a precious commodity. And the reasons for that are quite obvious. The youth aren't just people who will contribute to our future, they are our future. And so if their time is squandered aimlessly and if they don't use their resources, namely their time and their energy, in a manner that is efficient and conducive to their development and the development of the community, then we are at a loss. As a matter of fact, if you look around you in developed countries that are focused on education, or perhaps they might be focused on business, there's a lot of emphasis on ensuring that the youth are in a position where they can fully capitalize on their time. Countries like Singapore, Japan, because they care about what's going to happen, and there's a very competitive environment, economically speaking. And so when you look at the life of the average youth in Japan and compare that to the average youth in less developed countries, perhaps some of the Islamic countries that don't put such an emphasis on developing the skills of their youth, you will see there is a massive disparity between these two. But then when you look at our heritage, you look at the traditions of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, the pure and pristine Islamic teachings, what you find is a staggering number of traditions and teachings that they stress on the importance of using the time of the youth in a manner that produces results. So for instance, the Holy Prophet is famous for saying to Abu Dharr, his companion, Ya Abu Dharr, ihfaz, memorize and keep what I am about to tell you, for you will be happy in both this world and the next. Then the Holy Prophet says that one of the most precious gifts that you have is your time.
Indeed.
And it's in that particular hadith where the Prophet says, اغتنم خمسا قبل خمس, take advantage of 5 things before 5 other things happen. The first thing the Prophet mentions is شبابك قبل هرمك, your youth before you get old. Because we all know that when you're 15 or 16 years old, life is simple and easy, and you don't have a mortgage, you don't have a job, you don't have bills to pay, you don't have a family to look after, you don't have all of these problems which will bog you down and significantly slow your ability to become more productive down the line. So the Prophet begins by saying that use this time that you have, because if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And at some point in the future, you'll look back and regret the fact that you didn't take advantage of it.
Right. So thank you so much for answering this question. My next question here will be on the contrary lines, where you said that Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam emphasized on time management. Has he given any sort of formula, or perhaps any sort of footpath, or maybe a walkway where we can understand how do we spend our most time, or rather, if you can also answer me on the lines where we should not spend time on these factors, then which prohibits us to get some good results.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. There is, in fact, a narration by Imam Musa ibn Ja'far al-Kadhim, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, in which the Imam says that you should divide your time into 4 segments. The first is acquiring a livelihood, working. That's something that we all have to do in one way or another. The second, the Imam says, is time you spend in prayer and supplication. Again, something that we don't quite set aside specific hours for, perhaps with the exception of our prayers, which have to be performed at particular times. But generally speaking, the Imam says, have a time that's allocated toward prayer and supplication and acts of worship. The Imam then says, the third portion should be allocated to spending time with brothers and friends. But the Imam is more specific. He doesn't just say, spend time with any random person who happens to be your friend or coworker or colleague. He says people who care for you, number one, and number two, they tell you your flaws. If you make a mistake, they're going to be open and honest and frank with you, and they're going to tell you that here you should have done better. There you should have, perhaps avoided what you said or what you did. And finally, the Imam says the fourth portion should be allocated towards lawful and legitimate pleasures. The Imam then adds that it's this 4th hour or 4th portion that gives you the strength to ensure that the other 3 portions are looked after and provided for. So this is an incredible formula, if you think about it, trying to allocate equal amounts of time to these 4 broad areas and categories that comprise the bulk of our time.
But do you think that is possible if you divide your equal time into all these 4 sects, right, or on these 4 subjects? Do you think it is possible? Because if you go to earn some lawful sustenance, perhaps if you go to work, you would spend 9 hours a day to work, right? And then at the same point of time, if you want to spend some time with your family, then when would you sleep? Is that possible? I mean, and how is it possible?
Right. So I think sleep falls under the category of lawful, legitimate pleasures, perhaps. But I think what's important here is balance. So what tends to happen in the lives of people who are not very efficient or careful when it comes to managing their time or their schedule is that they lose track of balance. And so, for instance, they might scroll through their social media feeds for 3 hours or 4 hours, and when it comes to food, for instance, suddenly this becomes a focal point. You know how sometimes people call themselves foodies, right? That's not to say that every so-called foodie is spending exorbitant amounts of time on their food, but there are those who are completely obsessed with food, and so the amount of time they spend not just in eating but also in going out and reading reviews and whatnot is just too much. It's unreasonable. And so I think the key here that the Imam is stressing is balance and not overdoing things which would then jeopardize or compromise the other areas of our lives. Because if you didn't have pleasures, if you didn't spend time with family, if you didn't have fun, so to speak, that would also jeopardize the other areas of your life. You'll end up being depressed. You mentioned the 9 work hours, for instance. Yes, technically it's 9 hours, but there are gaps in between that can be utilized in one of those other areas for rest or pleasure or companionship with good friends and whatnot. And so it is possible, I think, to create some form of balance, even if I'm forced to work as a matter of necessity.
Right. So, Maula Sahab, my next question to you will be, is about you highlighted one of, just touched upon the impact of social media, right? Where anyone who happens to be a food obsessed just happens to read reviews and all that. Having said that, people also look at their Instagrams or perhaps their Facebook or perhaps what other social media applications where just they go through their feeds and all that. And if you understand, and I'm sure you would, people are addicted to it, right? Do you think that is a productive way to spend time? Or if yes, then how can we productively spend time on social media?
So I think the answer is obvious. No, that's not a very productive time to spend your time at all. But where's the proof? If you think about it, celebrities, movie stars, actors, athletes, they are the most popular people on social media. So for instance, on Instagram, Cristiano Ronaldo has about 500 million followers, followed by Messi and followed by people in that category. But what's interesting is that, well, a few things pop out. Number one, why are these people so popular? Why is he the number one most followed personality on Instagram? Because he's found a cure for cancer? Because he's learned how to colonize Mars? No. He can kick a ball around in a field. I mean, no disrespect, but my point is that there are far more important professions and far more productive and useful individuals who have really contributed to society and its betterment, and yet they're not very popular at all. It's these kinds of people. So that tells you a lot about the nature of social media and how it is an almost complete waste of time, number one. Number two, the proof that spending endless hours, and by the way, the average amount of time that people spend on social media on a daily basis, they say is about 2.5 hours, but that's only the average. And I think this factors in people in more developed economies, whereas if you survey countries where there's a high level of unemployment, youth disenfranchisement, and things like that, I think the number of hours really do add up. But one thing to note is that there's a lot of celebrities who are the reason why people are on social media to begin with, as we said earlier, who have switched off their social media accounts.
Right.
And they've gone completely off grid. They are not on social media. In fact, if you Google celebrities who are not on social media, you'll see a very long list of people. And it makes you wonder, why are they producing the content that we consume, but they themselves don't consume it on social media? What's happening here? For instance, one of these famous actresses, I watched an interview of hers, and she was saying that I'm not on social media, and neither are my kids. I don't want my kids to have social media accounts because, and it's not for the right reasons, it's not for moral reasons. It's because, she said, I want them to look at the clouds instead of taking photographs of the clouds, and then be depressed because somebody posted a comment about the clouds not looking nice, and just falling into this whirlpool of depression and so forth. So is this a productive way to spend our time? Absolutely not. I'm not saying there's no use for social media. I'm not saying that perhaps a little social media consumption could also be part of how we entertain ourselves in a good, healthy way. Maybe. But ultimately, the way the algorithm is designed, the way these websites are engineered, is to waste as much of your time and attract your attention for their financial gain and not for your benefit.
But do you know that, if we discuss this among the young individuals, they would cite an example to back us, and it can also lead us to backfire, because they would say, I'm learning the ethics of Lionel Messi, or of the sport, or perhaps maybe Cristiano Ronaldo, or perhaps maybe to Virat Kohli, They just want to learn the ethics of the game, and that is why they are spending some time on social media. How do we address these concerns?
I mean, I don't know what value we can ascribe to quote-unquote ethics of the game. But even if there was value, let's say you're trying to be a great athlete, and so that's your vision in life, that's your goal, and so you're following these individuals on social media to pick up their habits and their traits and whatnot. Social media is not the place to do this, right? It's not on social media that you learn the habits of highly effective and successful people. In fact, look at what successful people themselves do, right? For instance, they say that Bill Gates spends, I don't know how many hours, but in total he reads an average of 1 book per week. So 50 books a year. He's got this habit, which I found really interesting, where every year he travels to this remote desert island, and all he takes with him is a whole pile of books. He doesn't take his phone. He has no access to communication, maybe basic communication in case of emergencies like SATCOM and things like that. But he takes a whole pile of books with him for I don't know how many weeks, and he just spends his time in solitude reading. Now, for me to say that I want to be like Bill Gates, and so I follow him on social media, is the exact opposite of what Bill Gates would do, right? These people are putting their energy and their time and their effort into useful activities, whereas all I'm doing is consuming pictures of them, you know, Cristiano Ronaldo topless, so that I learn the ethics of the game. I mean, it's a cop out, really.
Perhaps they would also hire a social media manager to post all these pictures, rather they would spend time.
Absolutely. In fact, the reason they have these social media pages, they keep a presence there, is simply to promote other products and make money off of them. They're not trying to teach you anything. They're not there because they care about you. You know, like they say, if the service is free, then you're the product. The reason Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of these social media platforms are free is because you're the product. It's your data that they want. It's your time. It's the eyeballs. It's about getting as many views as possible so that they could sell that to advertisers and corporate entities. So let's not act as if these companies care about us. They do not care about us in the least bit.
It's simple. Nothing comes for free.
Absolutely. There's no such thing as a free lunch, as they say.
Okay. So my next question here will be, as you just touched upon the algorithm part, right? Which also leads me to the innovation part. Do you feel that if the youth tend to focus on innovations like maybe ChatGPT or perhaps algorithm or perhaps any other software development and all that stuff will be useful for them, and do you feel that they need to focus much of their time on that aspect rather than spending time on social media?
That's a good question. The way I see it is social media is a useful tool if you stop being a passive consumer and become a mindful and active creator. Or if you're not a creator, then you're not just a mindless consumer, and rather you're somewhere in between where you're trying to acquire some useful benefit or skill from it. For instance, on YouTube, you know, there are many channels that provide useful information. There are classes, there are instructional videos and things like that, and that's very useful. Again, insofar as social media is a tool that allows you to acquire a skill or a knowledge, then it's useful. And so, as far as innovation is concerned, yeah, absolutely, because that turns you into a creator as opposed to just a passive consumer. If you can gain an expertise in, you know, artificial intelligence and things of that nature, which is an emerging field in the internet, and use it in a way that is either useful for your livelihood or for your afterlife. So it has to be one of these two. Either it's going to benefit me in earning a living that's honest and permissible and halal for me and my family, then it's useful. Or if it's not that, then can I use it in order to progress spiritually or to help guide other people towards the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If one of these two boxes are checked, then yeah, get into these fields. Do what you can to acquire these skills. But if it's neither of these two, then it's a complete waste of time.
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree with you. In fact, my next question is, you travel across the globe, right? And I'm sure you meet a lot of young individuals, right? So what do you feel that what challenges do they come in their life, and how do they overcome all these challenges? What would be your solution to all these challenges, and perhaps any common challenges would you feel that they have they've encountered in the West as well as in the East and stuff and elsewhere as well?
There are many challenges that I think we need to grapple with. Some of them are common, while others are perhaps region specific. But if I were to sum up some of the biggest challenges that we face as a fledgling and growing community, in particular the youth of this community, I would say that number one, we're facing a war of ideas. There's an intellectual battlefront, and we are front and center trying to establish our ideas and our beliefs, while at the same time repel the barrage of attacks that are coming our way. Youth who go to universities are exposed to a labyrinth of ideologies, and these ideologies are often in conflict with each other, let alone with our faith tradition and our beliefs. And so the war of ideas is probably the biggest challenge. And I think the way to address that is to ensure that our youth are equipped intellectually. Many traditions of the Ahlul Bayt stress that youth should be engaged in seeking knowledge so that they could immunize themselves against dangerous thoughts and ideas. So that's the first challenge. How do we do that? Well, enroll in classes that provide you with the intellectual backing that you need. Ask scholars. Try and elevate yourself intellectually and in terms of your knowledge about Islam. That is critical. As much as we'd like to spend time on acquiring technical knowledge, for instance, or new skills, unfortunately, learning about our faith is something that's taken a back seat, and a lot of people don't feel that it's necessary for them to do this. Whereas when they recognize that they are in the middle of a battlefield here, where new ideas are emerging all the time, and they're challenging our perceptions and our thoughts and our beliefs, and that everybody's trying to sway us in their direction, I think then they'll begin to recognize the importance of acquiring knowledge. That's number one. Number two, I think one of the challenges that we face as youth is a lack of confidence in our faith tradition. I always say to the youth that you shouldn't view your religion, the religion of Islam, as a burden that sits on your shoulders that you have to carry for the rest of your life. You should be proud of your faith.
Indeed.
You should be proud of your leaders that represent the embodiment of all divine virtues. Rasulullah, the commander of the faithful, Fatimah al-Zahra, Imam al-Hasan, Imam al-Hussein, the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. These are people who are unequaled. They're unparalleled. No other faith tradition can offer examples like Imam al-Hussein, for instance, or Amir al-Mu'mineen, or Imam al-Rida, or Imam al-Jawad, or indeed the 12th Imam. No other religion or faith tradition or philosophical school has anything close to Nahj al-Balagha.
Indeed.
No one can offer us something that even resembles, for instance, As-Sahif As-Sajjadiyya. And so you should be proud of your heritage, your history, your personalities. You should even be proud of the minute details of your juristic tradition. Hijab is something to be proud of. It's not a burden, right? The dietary restrictions in Islam, what is halal and what isn't haram, these are things that are designed to make us live to our full potential as human beings rather than devolve into bestial creatures, right? They allow us to live a life of purity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made permissible at-tayyibat, as the Quran says, the things that are good and beautiful. وَحَرَّمَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْخَبَائِثِ. Think about all the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made haram or najis. Blood, semen, dead cadavers. I mean, Islam came to allow us to live to our full potential. And so I say to the youth, be proud of your faith. If you begin to look at Islam as a source of pride and as a source of, a source of feeling completely self-sufficient, then carrying this tradition and paying it forward and teaching it to other people will become a mandate that you place on yourself. And so that's the second challenge, lack of self-confidence.
Rather, I would say that, people have to invent their religion. We just have to follow. It's as simple as that.
Exactly. You follow the best of the best, right? Again, if we didn't have personalities like the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, then it would just be a theoretical, abstract notion, very difficult to put into practice. But then you look at the lives of the Ahlul Bayt, the beauty that they embodied and epitomized, and again, it all begins to make sense. The third challenge that I would point out as far as the youth and the community are concerned, I would say is marriage. Marriage is no longer, there was a time when people felt that marriage had to happen as early as possible because it's part of what you do when you're growing up. It's a rite of passage, as they say. Unfortunately, now marriage is seen as a secondary to a lot of other priorities that we have replaced it with. So now a lot of youth don't get married until they've graduated from university, they have a job, and they're well on their way to building their careers, which is a mistake. Marriage is a priority. According to our traditions, the famous prophetic hadith says, and I'm paraphrasing, the Holy Prophet says, إِذَا تَزَوَّجَ الشَّابُ فِي حَدَاثَةِ سِنِّهِ. If a young person gets married at an early age, because you could be 30 years old and you still call yourself young, the Prophet says, no, marry as early as possible. And if you do that, عَجَّ شَيْطَانُهُ. The devil who's sent to deceive you, who's ascribed to you, screams in pain and agony. Ya waylah. The devil will say, I wish I were dead. In other words, he gives up on deceiving this individual. He's now almost fully immunized. And so then the devil says, لَقَدْ أَحْصَنَ مِنِّي ثُلُثَيْ دِينِهِ. He has just protected his faith, or at least 2/3 of his faith, from my impact and my influence. Then the Prophet says, فَلْيَتَّقِ اللَّهَ الْعَبْدُ فِي الثُّلُثِ الْآخَرِ. So now all you should focus on is the one remaining third of your faith. And so there's always room for deviation and wrongdoing and sin and so forth, but the bulk of your religion is now immunized. So I think this is a big challenge. The youth need to appreciate the teachings of our faith and the fact that they have laid out this plan for all of us for our own good, and not keep on postponing or delaying marriage.
Thank you so much, Sayyid Muhammad Bedi. Indeed, I wish we had more time, but here the keys of the clock just run so fast. I don't think we can continue more. But yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Sayyid Muhammad Mahdi. Indeed, dear viewers, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned something good out of it. Please continue to follow and like and subscribe our social media accounts. Continue to spread the message of humanity and continue to watch Channel Win. Inshallah, see you soon. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.